I want to introduce you to some of the fundamentals when developing Android apps in Android Studio. I'm going to assume that you've already installed the JDK Android Studio and you've already created and tested your first Android virtual device. Also, I'm going to assume that you know how to create a new project. So here I've started a new project, and just so that you know, I like to minimize the build view, and I like to double click the tab up here so that it takes up the entire screen. This gives me a lot of development real estate, and I like the way it looks, and I can always go back and look at the project information or even the build information if I so desire. But for right now, let's go ahead and maximize everything. Okay, so this is our code behind Vue. This is the logical code that reacts to user input or tells the UI to change in some way at runtime. This view is our design view, and this is where we get to drag and drop elements onto the designer, and as we do that, we will see that the XML changes to match. We'll be mostly using the designer, and we'll be using the code behind to react to user input and to take action when the time comes. So first, let's talk about the designer. Now, this element here is called a text view. It allows us to display text to the user, and this is text that the user cannot augment in any way. They can read it, but they can't change it. Now, let's take a moment and, you can take this and you can move it around wherever you wish, and you'll notice that as we move it, there will be little guidelines that appear. There's actually a little dotted line. In fact, hang on a second. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these constraints so you can see this just a little bit better. In fact, you know what? Just delete that element altogether. Just get rid of it. Now we have a blank area. Our component tree only shows our constraint layout, and that's good. As we add elements to the layout here, you'll see them added on the component tree to the left. We have the common tab, which will allow us to take a text view and a button and an image or any of these common elements, but we can also go to just text elements of various flavors and buttons of various flavors and so on. We will largely be working in the common section, but we might jump down to text and buttons every once in a while. In the common section, grab a text view, click it, and then just drag it onto the view. Now, as we're dragging this around, you can see that every once in a while this little center line will appear to let us know how to center this element in the view. I have now let go, and it's just sort of staying exactly where I've dropped it. I can, if my icon is a finger, I can still move it around by clicking and dragging, and you'll see that that center line comes again to help me center my item once I get toward the middle. Now, I can also click on these circles and drag out to the sides to dock or constrain this view item to these edges. What I've done by constraining the right and the left is, should these dimensions ever change, if we flip over into landscape view, for example, then this object will always stay centered left to right. I can do something similar by constraining to the top and the bottom of the view, and that will allow me to completely center this item. Now, as we've added this item here, a whole series of values have appeared over here on the right-hand side. This is the attributes view. I also refer to these as properties. You can refer to attributes and properties almost interchangeably. And there are certain categories of attributes, such as layout attributes and declared attributes. If you see a right pointing arrow, you can click on that to expand and see other attributes underneath. What's interesting is that some of the more common or popular attributes will appear in multiple places. Remember that ID is right here, as well as in the declared attributes, and so is text. Text is in the declared attributes, as well as down here in the common attributes. Keep that in mind, because those are fields that we will change over time. In fact, let's come down here to where it says text, and in this box that says text view, let's change that message. We're going to be building a really simple light switch light bulb simulator. So we want to have a printed message that will say the light is on or the light is off. Let's go ahead and say the light is on. And I put a capital there. Let me just fix that real quick. There we go. Once you've typed your message, you'll notice that nothing has changed in the designer. And that's because we have to change focus, or in other words, we have to leave this box in order for the change to take effect. Now I can do that by clicking on another box, or When the focus is on the box where I've done the editing, I can always hit the Tab key and it will move the focus to the next control. Either one will work, and it will update your view to say the light is on. Also, if we want to resize this box, we can click onto the corners. You'll notice that my mouse becomes these two arrows, and if I click and drag, I can now resize this box however I see fit. And we're going to address other attributes of this text view a little bit later, but for right now, this is sufficient. I'm going to go ahead and holding the Control button, I'm going to click that constraint. Notice that by holding Control and clicking, it actually removes that constraint. And since I'm constrained to the top but not the bottom, my text view jumps right up to the top of the screen. Don't worry, this will make sense later. Let's go ahead, click on text, and let's grab a plain text item. And let's drag that over into the view and drop it. Now, even though it says plain text here, that's actually describing the kind of input that we're looking for. Really, if you look in the component tree, it's an edit text object. It's an edit text object. You might see one, you might see two. Because I've been playing with this for a little bit behind the scenes, the numbers are ever increasing, and that's fine. Don't worry about the numbers. Just understand that this is an edit text object. This is a text view object. Now, I'm going to dock this to the bottom of my text view. I'm going to dock it to I'm going to dock the bottom of this edit text to the bottom of the screen. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to take that back. I am going to go ahead and dock it right and left. What's going to happen next is I'm going to add a couple more controls, and we're going to dock them to each other, basically. We're going to constrain them to each other, and then we'll move them around a little bit. Let's click on buttons, and let's drag one button to the center and another button to the vertical center here as well. I'll try to line them up a little bit. It might make life easier later. I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I will dock that to the button. And this button, I wonder if I can dock. No, I can't dock back to the... I can't have a cyclic docking. That's fine. But we'll just do this. If we dock them to each other... So, let's see. Let's take this text view and let's dock it. Oh, it won't let me do that. Is that because Control-click remove the upper dock to name. Okay. And let's place these where we want them. Go ahead. You can play with this as much as you want. It actually helps to kind of play around with this, do some trial and error type stuff. Let's do that. Let's make sure our... Notice these horizontal and sometimes vertical biases. They determine how much you lean to the right or to the left. See, I can go all the way to the right or all the way to the left. If you want to be dead center, just double click that control. Pops it right back to the middle. And I think what's going to happen is the above item will dock to the item below. I think that's probably the best way to do this. Let's see. It doesn't like that very much, does it? I think part of it is I have to move this up. Move this up. Make sure the horizontal biases are centered. And you can style this however you see fit. I'm just trying to help you get an idea of how you can adjust this and make it so that as the resolution changes or the size of the screen itself changes, these can reposition in ways that make sense. Okay, I took some time to adjust these items, and for right now I'm happy with the way it's all set up, and I'm going to keep it this way. I can always play around with it in the emulator and see if I like the layout when I turn it to landscape versus portrait, and we can always make adjustments. But for right now, we have a text view with a message. We have an edit text with just some default content, and we have two buttons. Now, let's go ahead and play around with some of the properties of these objects. So we've already changed the text value of this text view. I like that. And one of the most important properties to change if you're going to access these in the code behind is to give it a meaningful name. We'll do that in the next video, but just remember that we're going to want to change this ID later down the road. For an edit text, there are a couple of cool properties that this has. One of the most important ones, in my opinion, is the ability to add hint text. So for example, the hint text will explain what I want from the user. So I might have them enter their first name. So I'm going to say first name. Now, you'll notice that even when I hit tab, nothing here changes. So what did I really affect? Well, the hint is the watermark that is left behind when there is no content in this box. But you'll notice that down in text, I have some default content. It just says name. I'm going to delete that and hit tab. And watch what happens when I hit tab. Watch this box for what happens. Because I removed the default text, there's no content here now. But since I have a hint, that hint has appeared as a watermark. This watermark will disappear when the user enters information, but it will reappear when that field is empty. Also, on this button, it has a text field. Now, hang on a second. Before we go any further, you'll notice that no matter which one I click, there are myriad attributes, so many properties that we could go through and change. And sometimes it can be hard to find the one that you want. Let me show you a little tip. This button has a text field, and if I didn't already see it down here, maybe this is collapsed, or maybe I've scrolled down this lengthy list of attributes, right? Look how many attributes there are, so many. In order to find the text field or any field related to text, over here in the attributes window, there is a search button, this magnifying glass. If I click on that search button and I type in a keyword like text, it will now bring up all the attributes that contain that keyword. If I want to get a little more specific, like maybe I want text all caps, then I can start typing more letters, and as I add letters that eliminate other options, they drop off, and eventually I get down to just the final property that's available. Of course, if I misspell anything, I'm left with no properties, because there's no property with a name like that, or that contains that term. So let's go ahead and go back to just text. Here's the text property or attribute that I wish to change. Let's call this let's just say on, and hit tab. And with this second button, let's go ahead and change its text to read off. You may have noticed that even though I switched elements, the original filter is still in place. The search filter is still in place. So no matter what I click, I will find properties with that search filter for that element. And so you can see that an edit text has a text field, and a text view has a text field, and buttons have a text field. Not every control has a text field, but these certainly do. Okay, so now that we have all of this, this is kind of a simple and a lame little app, but that's okay. We have now practiced playing with adding new elements, positioning them, constraining them to neighboring elements as well as the edges of the view, and changing some of their properties. The last one I want to show you for this video, let me go ahead and clear this search, and you'll notice down here that there is a property for all of these elements called layout width and layout height. Let's look at this message, and let's change its layout width. Instead of being an exact amount, which is 150 dp, let's change it to match constraint. You'll notice that it snaps to the edges because it is resizing itself to fit the constraints. The constraints say go all the way to the left and to the right, or rather balance yourself based on left and right. And so it's now filled up the entire area. And if I went to layout height and did the same thing, it would do something similar. If that's a little too close to the edges, we can always come back over here and we can add margin values. This is the left margin, and by the way, margin is the space between the next object, which in this case is just the edge of the window, and the element that you're adjusting. So let's put roughly 50 there, and hit tab. Yeah, I like that. And let's put 50 on the right side as well to keep it nice and balanced. Now the text is all the way to the left. Probably not my favorite. So let's change a couple more things on this text view. Using the search, let's find text appearance. Now this is interesting. I still have one result, but you'll notice that text appearance doesn't show. But there is this expansion arrow. If I click that expansion arrow, it will show me all the items underneath theme. And just so that you can see it for yourself, here are the properties that are underneath theme. There's quite a few actually. And the one that we care about is text appearance. It might look a little funny here, but notice the drop down. If I click that drop down, it's like, okay, which flavor of appearance would you like? First, I want to make this large text. So if I click on large, you notice that it gets a little darker, it definitely gets larger. We probably need to resize this a little bit. Yeah, let's make sure we resize that a little bit. All right, cool. And the text being slammed to the left, not my favorite either. So let's look up text alignment. And sure enough, there it is. Hit the drop down. Let's hit center. Oh, yeah, that looks pretty good. And you know what? Let's check out text color. And let's see if we can make that a little bit more interesting as well. We can do any color selection we want. You know what? I want to do some version of this green. In fact, let's see. Let's try this green. Oh, look at that. That's appropriately hideous. I like it. I like it. This is the different like hue and different saturation controls here. This is the opacity. And we can also take this dropper and we can sample a color out in the real world and bring it back to here. But mostly I'm just looking for how we can make this just a little bit of a brighter green. And let's see, what can we do? We can move this dot up. That's pretty, you can see the sample here. And let's see, yeah, I like it. Yeah, and let's go ahead and, if we hit tab, notice that it applies, right? So let's come back over here. It has our green. I like it. We'll leave the rest of it alone. I'm doing this on purpose because I know where we're going. The rest of it can be exactly as it appears. I'm okay with that. So now you've learned how to use the search filter to find properties of a particular element. You know how to add elements. You know how to constrain elements so that they dock to various landmarks in your UI. And we talked a little bit about the uneditable text view, the user editable edit text, and a couple of buttons, which we're going to use in the next video.